Hello everyone, welcome to Cinemancuso, and this is Review Roundup. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the latest and sometimes greatest films coming to a cinema near you. Today we are talking about One Battle After Another, written and directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. When their evil nemesis resurfaces after 16 years, a band of ex-revolutionaries reunite to rescue the daughter of one of their own. But before we go any further, if you haven't heard, or if you haven't already done it. Also, I'm going to kind of live adjust my microphone. I feel like it's like a little too loud here. This is the first time we're doing Review Roundup here on the channel. So, I think that should be a little bit better there. Before we go any further, if you haven't yet, please like this video. It really helps with engagement and the algorithm and people find the channel. And since, you found the channel, why not subscribe? This way, you're never going to miss reviews like this. This is going to mainly be a non-spoiler review. But we can and will get into spoilers at the end, so I can read, your questions and your comments. So with that in mind, if you're watching this live, first of all, welcome, right? And then second of all, conversations like this are always more interesting when we can have a dialogue. So I'm going to go through my own thoughts, and as I'm doing that, let me know what you think. And unless it's something like offensive, I'm going to read every comment and question if we have any from the live chat. If you're watching this after the fact, we're still super happy to have you here. By the time you're watching this, there should be time codes down in the description, so you should be able to jump around at your leisure. And you should definitely subscribe, so that way you can join us live next time. So let's just kind of jump right into things, starting with kind of the story, the plot, the themes and ideas of this. And there's a lot to get into with this movie, and I think the thing I want to start with is what I was thinking about probably from like beginning to end the entire time. And that is that this film really does feel like the perfect film for our current moment, right? In American politics and social history and political history. It really captures the anxiety that a society feels when it's on the brink of fascism. Or the twilight of a more democratic society, right? In the film, the police, they make it very clear because they have police across their chest, but the police in this film straight up just dress and act like full-on military forces. Like they use the term deploy, like we're sending in the police, like they're deployed to different, places to quell uprisings or unrest or things like that. And the film, it's tapping into like that zeitgeist, right? And kind of putting its finger on the pulse of not only the anxieties of people who are worried about Democratic backsliding in the United States, but also it reflects the anxieties of, the people who benefit most from a white supremacist political order, right? Where, straight white men are at the top and, that's the given. And then everything else is kind of negotiated around that. But and then that's what you're starting to see, and you see this in societies that veer into fascism, that, we find ourselves that it feels like the moment before it all starts crumbling down is when the establishment fights the hardest. And that's kind of why we kind of have like the Trump movement, right? Because it's not an accident that we get that immediately after electing a black president, right? And this film kind of reflects that. That's kind of like a little bit of a segue here, but this film is very much related to racial politics. The quote-unquote villain, I'm putting them in quotes, not because they're not villainous, but rather like, they're not villains like, I'm the villain, but more so just like the awful people in this movie, literally have like a secret white supremacist society that they use, and they're all like in these top positions in government. I think there's like a deputy director of progress, or right, like there's some really great world building here, because we don't really get all of it right away. Like it's not like we're it's not like, oh, also I see a comment here, the audio is worse, so let me turn things up, let me turn up the heat a little. Hopefully that's maybe a little bit better. But, our current moment, they have this great world building where there's all these like little hints of things, but there's no like big like info dump at the beginning to give us the state of affairs. It kind of just throws you into this world that is pretty similar to our own, right? And I think that, and one of the things I wrote down here in my notes is like, I really love near future dystopian work, because what it does is it takes things that are very recognizable to the audience that it's meant for, and extrapolates them like you do in any dystopian work, but it just extrapolates them just a little bit further, right? As opposed to something that's, it's a lot more effective than something that, thrusts us 50 or 100 years into the future. Because it's almost like too removed, and like, yes, you'll learn the lesson. I mean, this isn't about future necessarily, because it's like almost like in another reality, but think of like Star Wars. People like understand the Empire are the bad guys and the rebels are the good guys, but because it's different enough from our reality that like when those kinds of dynamics take place in our world, people are like take the side of the Empire, right? Even though they love Star Wars. So I think that works really well here. So it's a very recognizable world that Paul Thomas Anderson puts us in. And you have like the secret white supremacist group. I think they're called the Christmas Adventurers, right? So like they say like Hail Saint Nick. Like it's kind of like funny, but it's also disturbing, the banality of it, right? I mean, I'm not being unique there, right? Like this concept of the banality of evil. Paul Thomas Anderson really focuses in on that, and how these are just like they're just like regular people, and there's this whole kind of thing that the film's trying to explore, not just with racism, but like racial purification, right, and miscegenation, right, which is an old school term, right, basically referring to interracial sexual relations, especially if it produces a child, right? And that's a huge focus of this movie. And I didn't know this, but Paul Thomas Anderson's partner, I don't think they're married, but his partner since like 2000 something is Maya Rudolph, right? Like the famous actress comedian from SNL, who herself is a mixed race woman. And they have 4 children together. So these ideas that the film is exploring here of mixed race children kind of being the future, and a white supremacist kind of establishment that feels threatened, that usually intense racial fascism is the last gasp of that kind of order, right? So if it gives you any consolation, that usually when those groups are fighting the hardest, it usually means because like they're on their last leg or they're on the back foot, right? But again, the film kind of feels like it's a film from the 1970s. Not necessarily stylistically, but just in the sense that since the late 60s and 70s were so socially and politically turbulent, and there's so many films from that era that also kind of just captured it captures a feeling. It doesn't just capture the moment, right? Especially for something like this, because it's not historical, it takes place not in our moment, but it captures the feeling of a moment. And the film stands as a historical testament for posterity, for future generations, right? But again, I think the film is very, it paints these, white supremacists and fascists as, for what they are, which is deeply insecure, ideologically incoherent, right? And pussies, right? That ultimately they're just a bunch of pussies. And the film sometimes does a little bit of not necessarily a both sidesism, but I will say I think a critique from the left could be that it kind of paints like the stereotype of like snowflakes, quote unquote, which I hate even using that word, right? It's the film can sometimes suggest that the issue sometimes with revolution are like, the snowflakes, like the people that are like too sensitive or this, that, the other thing. And it's a little bit unfair, but I see the point that the film is trying to make, that, revolution is not going to accommodate you with a safe space, I guess is like the idea, right? So there's a lot of political stuff happening here. Easily Paul Thomas Anderson's most political film. But again, it's not political in the sense it's not talking about Republicans or Democrats. It's just talking about issues like, and again, mass immigration and migration is like a huge kind of force here, right? The film has incredible pacing, incredible. I was never once bored watching this movie. It's almost 3 hours long. It's 162 minutes, and that run time just flew by. it is a thriller in every sense of the word. That there was, even the moments of rest were never at rest. And that kind of reflects what it's like, I guess, to be in a revolution, right? That every moment is devoted to the revolution, and even those moments of quiet are opportunities where something bad could still happen, right? You could be ambushed, or you could do this or that. And the film explores ideas of heroes in revolution, and how on some level there is no such thing, right? The movement can be heroic, but the individuals are still human beings. And this isn't even just to say like, oh, they're not heroes because like they did bad things in service of the revolution. This just means that sometimes the people who make up this revolution are just incredibly flawed, and they just fall short as people in relationship to each other, right? And you take someone like Leonardo DiCaprio's character, Bob, though I think his real name is Pat, and then they change his name to Bob because he like goes into hiding, right? His character is considered by the younger revolutionary generation as like a war hero, yet we see him when he's like in his prime, and he's just like ideologically impressionable and just adrift, kind of getting swept up into things. And then by the time we see him in like the present, quote unquote present day, he's just a bum. He's just sitting around getting high all the time. You see them in this picture here to my which way? Because I have it reversed to on the left side of your screen here. Like, this is basically, he's in this outfit for most of the movie, because when all this is happening, he's just sitting at home in the middle of the day, or maybe kind of like in the evening, just like getting high, watching the Battle of Algiers, right? So he's kind of like a not even a fake revolutionary, because he's very involved with it when they're like in his prime. But there's this idea that people, that we sometimes put these people up on a pedestal, and it's not that, oh, that specific person doesn't deserve to be up on that pedestal, but rather, we shouldn't be putting anyone up on a pedestal. A, because they don't deserve it, but then B, we don't, like, it's not really good for us, right? Because then when we discover that person is kind of flawed, we then go, well, then we throw the baby out with the bathwater and go, well, then this whole thing is stupid, right? And I've been talking a little bit about the characters here in Revolution, and I think one of the film's greatest strengths, compared to some other resistance-focused films, like I mentioned the Battle of Algiers, right, or even the more recent How to Blow Up a Pipeline. This film not only never loses sight of its characters, but it is the glue that holds the film together, is its characters. Because a film like the Battle of Algiers and How to Blow Up a Pipeline especially was my biggest problem with that movie, is that the character work and the script and like the dialogue and it was just very flimsy, or just not up to par with the incredible thematic material, right? And sometimes that's the intention, right? So something like Battle of Algiers, I wouldn't say has bad writing. I think I think they use a lot of non-actors for that movie, but I could be wrong. That movie's a triumph of filmmaking, but I struggle to put it in my personal canon of like favorite movies because of this issue. Like, I really don't care about any of the characters. I care about the people, but not the characters as like characters I want to follow. Not because they're unlikable, in the way that, like, because they're a bad person. They're just not really the focus of that movie. It's really about portraying what a revolution is like. And in this film, the revolution and the socio-political stuff is the backdrop for really interesting character work. And I shouldn't even call it backdrop, right? Because it's not just set dressing, right? It's not just like, oh, here's this kind of stuff happening in the background. The two of them, the socio-political stuff and then the character work, are not distinct verticals, that they work in concert, that they feed off of one another. To make for some really, they enhance one another, where the socio-political stuff works better because we are seeing it play out in the personal lives of these characters. So speaking of the characters, right? Oh boy, wait, here we go. There we go. Sorry, I'm still figuring out this news. I have new monitors up and everything, so you gotta forgive me. But speaking of the characters, right? The film, because of its subject matter, is really interested in exploring the tension between the individual and their humanness and human needs, and the tension between that and the cause, right? And sometimes for better or for worse, the revolution can sometimes be an avenue for one's own personal needs, right? Where the revolution almost becomes the means to some kind of end. Tiana Taylor, as Perfidia, right? I think that's her name in the film Perfidia, Beverly Hills. What an amazing name. Once again, she shines. Right? I loved her in the film 1001, which did not get a lot of love. I think it's just because it was a kind of a smaller independent film. Like, that was one of my favorite films of that year. And she was so great as like that central character. But even at the time, I remember being like, oh, she has the makings of a great actress, but she's not a great actress yet. This film, if she's not already, this gets her incredibly close. That she's really is one of the standouts. And it's interesting because she's so front-loaded, right? She's really, her portion of the film is really in like in the first, 20, 30 minutes. Like there really is, like, because the film's so long, there's like this prologue, if you could call it that, that's like 30, 40 minutes long, or however it is. It's hard to even guesstimate because I was just so engrossed in the story, like time vanished. I wasn't even thinking about like how many seconds or minutes had passed. But she's front-loaded, but critically so, right? It almost works how much of her is at the beginning, because it really sets the tone for the film. And her kind of character not only sets the tone for the book, but kind of sets the table. Because she's her character is just this stormy soul. She just, she's just lost in the sea of her own anger and frustration, right? About the injustices of the world, about her own life. And again, like I mentioned before, revolution almost seems like a means to an end. And because of that, and I don't want to give too many spoilers, but because of that, the revolution, when you're doing things to service your own needs and the revolution, but then you hit a fork in the road where like you can only do one or the other, her ideological commitment to the cause is not as strong as, you were maybe led to believe, right? But Tiana Taylor, again, she just commands the screen whenever she's on it. And again, this was a similar issue to her performance in 1001, where she can at times do like overact just a little bit, but again, more so with this film than that film. In this film, it works sometimes because again, it feels like sometimes she's kind of putting on a persona, or like a self-serving persona to give herself a sense of security. So in a lot of ways, she is an incredible foil to the other standout of the film, Sean Penn, right? He is just one. I know he's kind of like insane in real life, just like getting into fights with people and things, but he really is just one of our greatest actors. And I mean, no one's ever doubted this. Again, it's just his personal. Some of the things in his personal life are like a little concerning, right? But perfectly cast, right? He reminds me a lot of Sterling Hayden's character. General Brigadier Jack D. Ripper in Dr. Strangelove, right? The guy who's obsessed with the bodily fluids, the one who starts the whole sending off the nukes. Not that these two characters are necessarily similar, but they both have this strange conspiratorial foreboding energy. And the reason why I bring them up, that they're Sean Penn's character and Tiana Taylor are kind of foils for one another, is it reflects this deep insecurity. In this persona that they create. Because Sean Penn desperately wants to be part of the club, right? Lowercase c club, but also like literally the club, the Christmas Adventurers Club, this white supremacist secret society. And he desperately wants to be part of it. But I'll give you like a little bit of a spoiler here. But the issue is that he, he can't have been involved sexually with anyone other than white people. As part of like the background check, and he's been involved with Tiana Taylor at one point. So, there's like this self-loathing, this weird, very psychosexual thing going on with Sean Penn. He just has complete command, like Tiana Taylor, just every scene that he's in, he just commands the screen and steals the show. So when they're both together on screen, it's like fireworks. It's really incredible chemistry. Or dynamic, I should say, because chemistry, they're not meant to like each other, but just this dynamic is just very palatable, not palatable, but visceral, right? It's really, you could cut it with a knife. It's so, has so much dimension and texture to it. And the way he walks even is so funny. Like, because Sean Penn's like this short little guy. And they really lean into that, again, like this feeling of insecurity and inadequacy that often leads to fascism. And the way he walks has kind of become a meme, like, because he's like, it almost looks like he's had like major back surgery, so he just walks very like he has to like swing his arms and legs around in order to move his like very stationary, solid, blockish torso. And it's just really phenomenal. Going through the rest of the cast, again, Leonardo DiCaprio, he's also like incredible, right? I mean, everyone in this movie does a really good job, but Leonardo DiCaprio, obviously, I mean, again, this is not new. He is also really one of our best actors. And the thing about Leo DiCaprio is that he always kind of feels overrated. Like, you think about it and you go like, oh, like, why is he such, like, and then you watch him in like a new film, and then you remember like, oh yeah, he's the GOAT. Like, he really is one of the greatest of all time that's ever done it. And he does something similar here. This character is way more sympathetic than his last character in Killers of the Flower Moon, who was just like a completely unredeemable little worm of a man. This character that he plays here is obviously more sympathetic and meant to be more sympathetic, but no matter who he's playing, one of Leonardo DiCaprio's strengths is he's always able to bring a sympathetic quality to an otherwise annoying or even unlikable character. Or not even sympathetic, but just you just are glued to him. I mean, think about his performance in Django Unchained, right? I mean, he's even more unredeemable. He's more cartoonishly evil than his role in Killers of the Flower Moon, but you can't take your eyes off of him, right? And not that you make him sympathetic, but you just make him so, he just makes his character so vivid and real that it's harder to dismiss them as being cartoonishly racist, right? You're like, on some level, you want him, these awful characters he plays to like see the light, because they feel so real, and you don't want them to be evil if they feel so real, right? So he's just incredible. Benicio del Toro isn't in as much as I thought he was going to be, but his role is nevertheless important. Basically being so calm, cool, and collected to contrast Leonardo DiCaprio like freaking out when like shit hits the fan. And his whole kind of thing, basically him and his family is running almost like a Latinx like underground railroad to smuggle people through the country. And the way he kind of reacts to when shit starts hitting the fan shows, because he's been in this fight for a really long time. Whereas Leonardo DiCaprio's character, by the time he gets like the president, has kind of been out of the game for like a decade and a half. And it shows that people of color have been in this fight for way longer, and they can't just like disengage for 15 years. Like, they are, they don't have a choice. And because of that, they are way better prepared and equipped to handle when there's a crackdown, when there's a crisis, and things like that. Regina Hall is here as well. Right? I don't know why she was in this movie. She must have had a good audition, because again, she's typically known for more comedic roles. She does a really solid job here. She doesn't feel miscast at all, especially considering it's a dramatic role. But again, there's not really too much for her to do, which, is not like the end of the world. But, another person who doesn't really have a lot to do until at least the end, but yeah, is the crux of the film is Willa, right? Played by Chase Infinity, who essentially plays Tiana Taylor's daughter. And she, at times I was getting a little concerned watching the film, because for most of it, she really was just like a plot device, and more of like a symbol, kind of like Scarlet Letter style of like, what's Hester Prynne's daughter? I always forget her name, but she almost like is like, when you're taking like 10th grade American literature, right? That's American literature, right? Yeah, because it takes place in America. They talk about the daughter being like a symbol, like she's more of a symbol. And that can be a problem, right? When you don't have many female characters and one of them is basically just a symbol and a plot device. But that symbology is thematically interesting, right? She basically represents the future of the resistance and in a sense, the future of America, right? Being mixed race, being this kind of, this idea that the struggle not just against oppression from a government, but also oppression by our own shortcomings, right? We are, as human beings, we're oppressed by our shortcomings and our flaws. And that is the meaning of life, or the mission of life, is to overcome that oppression, that self-oppression, if you will. So when we have children, that kind of feels like we're getting an inch closer, inch by inch, right? That she represents the future of the resistance and the future of humanity. That, you know, there's this idea that, you know, maybe Willa will be the thing to, you know, maybe they will solve it. And they're really talking about, like, the fight against this oppressive government, but I think it goes deeper than that. But even beyond this symbology, it was really great to see, like, basically the last little bit of the movie, she really gets the room to shine. And then I realized it was important that she was just kind of a plot device. That, you know, she is basically, in that last little bit, taking the mantle to continue the fight. Again, that two-front fight, both the external and the internal. And she really, really comes into her own in ways that are really inspiring, right? A film that has such a bleak outlook for potentially where we're going also feels incredibly optimistic and hopeful about the future. And again, the film, it's you wouldn't be able to do that in a film like this that's focused on revolution without a strong focus and attention paid to the characters, right? Lastly, kind of talking about the filmmaking here. You know, this goes without saying, Paul Thomas Anderson is one of the best actors, one of the best directors, at least in the modern era. And this is interesting because this is completely different than anything P.T. Anderson has done before in his filmography. It's one of the best thrillers that I've seen in years. Totally worth the IMAX ticket, the premium ticket price for IMAX. Not just visually, though. I am very lucky. I live in Providence, and we have an IMAX screen that is like the IMAX screen at Lincoln Square in Manhattan, where it's not just like a really big screen, but it's like the vertical aspect ratio. They can do the 70 millimeter projection, which they did like for Oppenheimer. So I live near Providence, so I'm able to see it like on one of the better IMAX screens in the world. No, you know, a little humble gloating there. But it wasn't just for the scale of the visuals, but also the sound, right? I mean, going to a theater at all is just going to be a better sonic experience than watching it at your house, because it's surround sound, it's louder, it's a lot more quality. But IMAX especially, like every gunshot was like a jump scare. Every musical note, right? It was a full visual sonic experience that just envelops you. And those huge visuals on the IMAX screen help, right? Really envelop you. You know, the revolution will not be televised, right? But it will be filmed on 70 millimeter and projected on an 80-foot high screen. And again, you know, the visuals are just stunning. Not just good, like, on fundamentals level, but again, that scope. You know, the film had something like $130 million, $175 million budget. I imagine a big portion of that went to the salaries for this stacked cast, but I imagine a good portion of that must have gone into creating this epic scope with these massive vistas. There's like this iconic, soon to be iconic. Like sometimes you're watching a film and you go, "That's going to be something iconic that people are going to talk about for decades." There's this iconic kind of sequence of shots going over these hills in what I presume is Southern California. I don't really know my West Coast geography all that well, but clearly the desert, and you're going over these hills on these roads, and they have these incredible long angle, long lenses that really flatten the image, and they must have attached to a car, and they're just going over the hills. And I've never seen driving on a street, on a road, with hills kind of coming in and out like this. I've never seen anything like it. It's hard to describe. I kind of sound like I'm insane right now, but if you see the movie, if you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So like the production value on this, again, there's some good action, quote unquote, sequences, meaning like a raid on an immigration facility or like a protest in the streets. Like they really didn't spare any expense to really, what would that actually be like? And let's not half-ass it. This is possibly, his best film, right? Now, granted, this makes his 10th film, and I've only seen now 6 of them, right? I've seen Magnolia, Punch Drunk Love, There Will Be Blood, The Master, Licorice Pizza, and now this, One Battle After Another. So, importantly, I've not seen the other ones, including like Boogie Nights, right? Which is like the one that really put him on the map. But, you know, and of those, you know, Magnolia, There Will Be Blood, The Master, those are some of like my favorite films. And so most of his films are base level really, really, really strong. But this film it really just feels like the whole package. It has everything that you could like about Paul Thomas Anderson's work, but then he also adds in things he's never done before. Again, like this thriller, like it feels like a Tarantino movie in parts. And it's just incredible. And I mentioned it before, but the music as well. Again, just perfectly elevated the film. There's a lot of key sequences that had this like discordant, arrhythmic score that threw you off balance and increased your disorientation and the tension of the scene. And, you know, it was just this incredible, you know, formal experience, right? I kind of raved about the characters and the script and things like that, but just on like a filmmaking level. You know, this is a guy who's been doing this for decades now, and he really is, you know, we're getting a lot of legacy director. I mean, he's not as old as someone like Scorsese, but, you know, Kills of the Flower Moon is like one of Scorsese's best. And I think this is his best. This is One Battle After Another is P.T. Anderson's best film. And so we're getting a lot of legacy directors who are like making some of their best work. Where typically you imagine like it's very front loaded and then they you know they go down from there, right? So this is the part now where I'm gonna turn it over to you guys. I'm not seeing any comments or questions. No one watching has any comments or questions. That's okay. This is the first time. I'm sure my subscribers, they're all at a convention celebrating me, and they just don't have the time to leave. So that's okay. So to kind of wrap things up then, this was incredible. I had heard incredible things about it. The Letterboxd review, the Letterboxd score was incredibly high. It was like a 4.5 out of 5. People were saying it's like easily the best film of the year. And I was like, I'm sure, right? But I've heard things like that before, and then I go and I'm like, that was really good, but I don't know. This not only matched my expectations, but it exceeded them. This was incredible. Absolutely the exact movie that we need right now, and I'm sure there's going to be some discourse about this movie, but I'd love to add to the discourse and just say this is a movie that we should all watch. And it really gives us a sense of where things can go. But we always have to remember that we have to keep, we have to keep a focus on the characters, or in the sense of our real world scenario, we have to keep focus on people and individuals, right? And, you know, start from there and let your ism flow from that, right? As opposed to deciding how we feel and then coming up with rationalizations later. You know, like focus on human beings and then let your ideology spring forth from that. So I am going to give this film out of 10. I'm going to give this film, I gotta do it. I had to do it to him. I gotta give this a 9. This is amazing. This is one of the best films I have ever seen. It is a film that is an instant classic, a film that I am hopefully going to revisit many, many more times before I shuffle off this mortal coil. So with that in mind, you know, take that as a high, 2 thumbs up from Peter. I review Roundup here. So that's it for this installment of Review Roundup. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, please like this video. It really, really helps with engagement and the algorithm and people finding the channel. And since you found the channel, why not subscribe? This way, you'll never miss a video. Until next time, peace out.